Despite being one of the shortest episodes in terms of runtime, at a meager 49 minutes, I believe that the Ghouls is quite simply the Fallout TV series' best episode. Let's talk about it. Here's 5 reasons why the Ghouls is Fallout's best episode. But first, a quick rundown. After losing Wilzig's head and more importantly his ghoulish chem vials, the Ghoul takes Lucy hostage, planning on using her for a side quest of his. The episode opens with a pan over the desert wasteland as Let's Go Sunning plays in the background. We see a radroach. That's neat. We see our favorite duo stroll through the neighborhood as the Ghoul coughs, suffering some withdrawal symptoms. The pair come upon a clinic where we find an old friend of the Ghouls, a frantic Roger. He is frantically repeating that his name is Roger, hoping that this will prevent him from turning feral. Lucy wants to help the ailing Ghoul, but without any spare vials, she finds herself unable. While reminiscing about comfort foods, Blamco mac and cheese for Raj, apple pie and ice cream for the Ghoul puts his old buddy out of his misery, shooting him in the side of the head. As the Ghoul loots Roger's body, Lucy pleads, lamenting that while she understands the wasteland is a harsh environment, you don't have to resort to doing morally abhorrent things like grave robbing and desecrating the dead. She also reveals that her name is Lucy McLean, evoking a response from the Ghoul. The Ghoul demonstrates his proficiency with the cannibal perk as he chows down on poor Raj. Again, Lucy laments that you don't have to let the wasteland turn you into a bad person, sharing a story of how a famine in their vault led to a mass starvation event. In response, the Ghoul remarks that there's what people say they did and what they really did. We see that evidently the pair are ideological opposites. Lucy notes that living an evil and immoral life isn't worth living, and in response, as a show of force, the Ghoul forces Lucy to carve up old Raj, one of the first wasteland perversions that Lucy is forced to endure. Just as the Ghoul said, ass jerky don't make itself. The episode then cuts to an intro card with blood spraying over the Fallout logo. It then cuts to Vault 33, where we see Reg and Woody put up posters as the elections for a new overseer are soon coming up. The dwellers remain unaware of why raiders attacked their vault, but one dweller is determined to find out. Mourning the loss of his father, Norm MacLean wants to figure out the whats, whys, and hows of the raider attack from episode 1. In an intimate conversation over some pie, Betty lightly threatens Norm about digging too deep into the situation. We're then back to the wasteland as Lucy and the Ghoul are quite thirsty. We come upon an irradiated pool, and while the Ghoul is unaffected by the rads, Lucy is not. Left without a choice, she plunges her face into the irradiated water in what would be the second event where the wasteland tries to corrupt our vault hero. The Ghoul taunts Lucy about her golden rule that we saw in the previous episode, do unto others as you would have unto you. Disgusted by the Ghoul's actions, Lucy asks, "What are you?" The Ghoul responds, "I'm you, sweetie, just give it a little time," implying that with enough time, the wasteland will turn everyone into selfish beings who will do anything in order to survive. A common theme we see throughout the games, I might add. Amidst a coughing fit, Lucy attempts her getaway, coming upon a crater, before being lassoed by the Ghoul. During a scrap, Lucy manages to bite off one of the Ghoul's fingers. The Ghoul responds somewhat gleefully, or as gleeful as anyone could be after losing a finger, saying, "There you are, you killer." The Ghoul's attempts at corrupting the innocent vault dweller seem to have worked. As compensation, the Ghoul slices off one of Lucy's own fingers. That right there is the closest thing we've had to an honest exchange so far. We now cut back to the vault. We see Chet getting ready to chow down on some grub before Stephanie stops by, ready to hand over some of Bert's belongings. The pair attempt to hook up in one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the entire series, but before things can progress any further, Stephanie's water breaks. Back to the wasteland. Lucy and the Ghoul finally make it to their destination, a Super Duper Mart. As the Ghoul calls into the store, Lucy realizes what's actually going on. Lucy is being sold for chems. Threatened at gunpoint, Lucy solemnly walks into the store. The Ghoul passes out before we cut to the next scene. Inside, she is met with Snip Snip, a Mr. Handy bot ready to administer some medical aid. Thinking that she is actually receiving some good old-fashioned medical aid from a good old Mr. Handy, Lucy lets her guard down. Snip Snip reattaches a slightly used finger back onto her hand before admitting that he plans on harvesting her organs. Lucy is shot with a tranq dart, and we cut to a new scene. Norm is bringing some jello desserts to the captured raiders, but gifts it to another dweller instead. Norm taunts a raider before the raider admits that the people of Vault 32 were doing things that were anything but innocent. This piques his interest as he scours a terminal for info. Good on him, really. Someone's gotta read those things. After finding out that his access to some logs has been denied, he asks Chet to come along on a little adventure. The pair go to Vault 32, where they find things were anything but normal. The vault is in utter tatters, with decayed crops, ruined furniture and hallways, and year-old corpses of vault dwellers are strewn about, indicating that some sort of vault civil war occurred 2 years ago. A television plays a bit about a mice utopia, noting that eventually overpopulation occurs, leading to a war between the mice for survival, indicating what happened to Vault 32. The scene ends as they find a message scribbled in blood: "We know the truth." We come back to Lucy as she's being wheeled on a gurney. As she comes to, we cut between flashbacks of her and her mother, and the ghouls trapped behind the glass doors of the frozen section of the grocery store. We see one ghoul, Martha, imitating the coping technique Roger used at the beginning of the scene, repeating her name in hopes of holding out from going feral. We soon meet the duo in charge of the business, Huey and Squirrel. They're kinda just some post-war stoners, eating a cup of noodles, shooting chems, and watching TV. Aside from the whole human trafficking and organ harvesting bit, relative to the rest of the wasteland, it doesn't seem that bad. Lucy is wheeled to the back, where she pleads with Snip Snip, saying that he can't do this and that she needs her organs to live. Just as Snip Snip prepares to cut into her, she deflects the saw blade, escaping, and short-circuiting the bot with a defibrillator. She takes Snip Snip hostage with some Abraxo draining fluid. She demands that Huey and Squirrel let her go free and release the ghouls. All the ghouls. As the wasteland novice that she is, she doesn't realize that all the ghouls includes the feral ones too. But threatened with bleach on steroids, the pair comply without much protest. The feral ghouls attack, taking down the duo while also getting themselves killed in the process. The only ones left are Lucy and Martha. Lucy attempts to defuse the situation, reminding Martha of her name, but as a final resort is forced to shoot the recently turned feral ghoul. This marks the first time that Lucy took the life of another person in the show, and is one final moment showing how the wasteland manages to corrupt people. We see a long shot of a blood-covered and distraught Lucy as she tries to calm herself down. A rough and tumbled Snip Snip asks her if he can do anything to help her have a better day, but Lucy replies, "No thank you." The scene cuts to black before we resume with Norm and Chet's search of Vault 32. We see some hanged corpses of dwellers before they manage to make it into the Overseer's office. They discover the corpse of Overseer Ian Jackson, tortured and bound with rope. "Death to management" can be seen graffitied in blood on the wall. Norm peruses the Overseer's terminal, discovering that the vault was open from the outside using the Pip-Boy of Norm's mother, Rose McLean. We cut back to what is one of my favorite scenes from the entire series. We see a brand new Lucy as she walks out of the store. Her vault jumpsuit is tied at her waist, reinforced with some leather armor, and she's carrying a holstered 10mm pistol. Her face and white tank top is covered in blood. We see that the Lucy that went into the Super Duper Mart is not quite the same Lucy that's leaving it. Or is she? She stands next to the barely conscious Ghoul, in one hand a chambered pistol, and in the other the life-saving vials. And despite all the torturous anguish that the Ghoul subjected Lucy to, slavery, desecrating the dead, depriving her of water, cutting off a finger, and human trafficking, Lucy drops one of the coldest lines in the entire series. I may end up looking like you, but I'll never be you, calling back to their previous interaction. She places a handful of vials next to the Ghoul before standing up, walking away, and uttering her first swear. Golden rule, motherfucker. What a great scene. An altered version of the Fallout theme plays as Lucy walks away from the Super Duper Mart. She's a changed woman, yes, but a corrupted woman, no. This is the last time we see Lucy in the episode. The next scene, we see the Ghoul stumble through the Super Duper Mart, ignoring the carnage and downing a wide variety of chems and alcohol. As he's piling chems into his hat, he notices a TV. This prompts him to drop the hat full of chems, breaking some in the process. The Ghoul finds a holotape of an old movie of his, puts it into the TV, and presses play. We see a pre-war Cooper Howard shoot and kill the film's villain, Joey Toro. The episode ends with the Ghoul reminiscing as he watches his pre-war self. With that synopsis covered, let's get into why exactly the Ghouls is just so great. Iconic Fallout imagery. Up first is a pretty obvious one. The Ghouls fantastically portrays the darker side of the Fallout franchise. While other episodes do contain some iconic Fallout imagery and themes, the Ghouls is quite gritty and violent with how it shows off the wasteland. To open the episode, we not only get this gruesome mercy kill, but also see acts of cannibalism, something that has been part of every Fallout game, with a cannibal perk being available in Fallout 3, New Vegas, 4, and 76. It's a crime against nature, yes, but it's a staple to the Fallout universe. Slavery is another one of those despicable acts that has made some sort of appearance in just about every Fallout game. Whether it be the Slavers Guild or Paradise Falls or Kaiser's Legion, the act of slavery is a common occurrence in the wasteland. Much of the first half of the episode is dedicated to the Ghoul taking part in the slave trade in order to get some vials. AI gone wrong is another common and humorous theme from the games. Snip Snip, despite having a cheery demeanor, says a lot of pretty twisted things, like, oh, we're not going to make you a sex slave, we're just going to harvest your organs. That contrast between what is being said and how it is said results in the same humor we see from some of the robots in the games. For example, Andy from Fallout 3, when he becomes the Vault's surgeon after you and your dad left, has a bit about why he amputated Beatrice Armstrong's leg. He determined that a toe injury was life-threatening, resulting in the removal of the entire leg, and leading to her bleeding out. The situation itself is quite dark, yes, a botched surgery leading to the death of someone who cared about you as a child, but it is played for laughs in the games due to Andy's AI personality, a common Fallout trope. While Norm and Chet explore Vault 32, we see a handful of corpses in some pretty morbid positions, not unlike the many environmental storytelling skeletons we see in Fallout 3 onwards. A corpse with a foosball pole sticking out of them, a pair of corpses strangling one another, and a corpse holding a fork in a toaster. It's dark, but I'm pretty sure I've seen those exact poses from skeletons in the games, except for the foosball one, of course. A foosball table has only ever appeared in Fallout 76, and only as a camp item, so I definitely haven't seen that one. But I wouldn't be surprised if Fallout 5 had that same death scene, but as a skeleton. And the last one I'll mention is the graphic disembodied corpses. We see a small assortment of mutilated and disemboweled corpses as Lucy is taking her gurney ride. This scene, and specifically the way the bodies are displayed, is very reminiscent of the various raider displays that we see in many of the games. It's quite graphic. So if you're a fan of the darker and more grotesque parts of Fallout, Episode 4, The Ghouls, has got you covered. Foreshadowing. Another great part about the Ghouls is all the great foreshadowing moments. In the opening scene after the Ghoul kills Roger, he asks Lucy for her name. It's after hearing her name that the Ghoul pauses for a moment. It's this relatively mundane moment that foreshadows the Ghoul's first encounter with Hank McClane over 200 years ago. We see in a big reveal in the final episode that Cooper Howard had actually met Hank whilst he was spying on his wife Barb at Vault-Tec's LA headquarters. This is likely why Coop shows such disdain for Lucy's father when she talks about the hardships she and her family faced while living in the vault. The Ghoul's true motivations are further foreshadowed in Episode 4. Up until now, all we know is that the Ghoul is after the bounty on Wilzig. The reality is that the Ghoul is truly after information regarding his wife's and child's whereabouts. As Hank and Lee Moldaver have relevant pre-war information, the Ghoul is after both of them, and we see hints of this in the same beginning scene. When Lucy asks the Ghoul how he lives like this and why he chooses to keep going, he silently pauses before redirecting the question and forcing Lucy to carve up some ass jerky. It's in this pause and reluctance to answer the question that one might pick up on the fact that the Ghoul is more than just a selfish bounty hunter who only looks out for themselves. He then, of course, immediately goes back into the bounty hunter persona, but it's undeniable that Lucy's question fazed him to some extent. It's subtle, but it's there, and it's a great piece of character development. And the final bit of foreshadowing we will talk about today, there's definitely more, is the fact that Betty knows more about the Vault's situation than she lets on. So something that definitely took more than one watch was Betty's treatment of Norm in the aftermath of his father being kidnapped and Lucy leaving. A quaint conversation between Norm and Betty at first might seem like a typical exchange between a maternal and caring adult and a young man who has just lost the rest of his family. Norm thinks he's going to be chastised by Betty for his past outburst at a meeting, but instead Betty offers some advice and reassurance. However, it's on second or third watch that one might better realize the dynamic between the two. It's a conversation that actually foreshadows that Betty knows more than she lets on. Betty knows that Norm is a clever man and is very interested in getting to the bottom of why the raiders took his father. In a final statement before the scene ends, Betty tells Norm to tread lightly. At first, this would seem like a general remark about being careful about his outbursts, but the reality is that Betty is subtly threatening Norm to stop his investigation. We find out later in the series that Betty is one of Bud's buds and knows about the Vault's experiments, hence the warning and threat we see in this episode. It's a really well done scene that foreshadows Betty's larger role in the happenings of the Vault. Lucy and the Ghoul's character development. Another key aspect about what makes Episode 4 great is the significant character development and changes for both Lucy and the Ghoul. The most obvious is that they both go through some physical changes. At the start of the episode, aside from a missing boot, Lucy maintains a proper Vault Dweller look. She's a little rough for wear, yeah, but the wasteland has yet to change her. By the end of the episode, however, we get this pan-up shot of her with an altered look. She is wearing leather armor, has a holstered pistol, and is battered and bloody. She's gone through a physical change, and not to mention the loss of her finger. As for the Ghoul, it's a bit more subtle. Ever notice in all the other episodes before, we never see the Ghoul without him wearing his hat? Well, I did. But it's in episode 4 where we see a hatless Ghoul for the first time. During these scenes, he's not his rough and tumble, no-nonsense self, but rather we see him at the mercy of Lucy and the rest of the wasteland. In these scenes we see the Ghoul without his hat, we see that he's not some super badass macho man, but rather a pained and troubled one. It's a small change, but it has a noticeable effect. And just like Lucy, the Ghoul also loses a finger. But there's more to their characters than just their physical transformations. I think that the Ghoul wasn't necessarily wrong when he said that they're both the same, he's just had more time. The two characters compare and contrast really well between each other. At the start of the episode, the Ghoul controls the power dynamic, having captured Lucy, taunting her, subjecting her to wasteland traumas, etc. But by the end of the episode, it's now Lucy that has full control over their power dynamic, having the choice to leave the Ghoul for dead or save him. Their power dynamic has completely shifted. There's contrast there. We also get to see how the two characters learn from one another. At the start of the episode, there's Lucy and the Ghoul. One is representative of evil and wickedness, and the other is innocent and naive. The Ghoul has lived in the wasteland for over 2 centuries and has become accustomed to the unspoken rules of survival within it. Look out only for yourself and do anything to survive. We see this in the way he carves up his former friend for food, drinks from an irradiated source, and sells Lucy for a shipment of vials. As for Lucy, she is brand new to living in the wasteland and believes, naively or not, that you can survive by being kind to others and treating them how you want to be treated, the golden rule. And by the end of the episode, their views, while not necessarily changing, have been challenged. While Lucy maintains her belief that being kind is rewarded with kindness, she does go through a traumatic experience due to being overly nice. We see this when she naively demands that Huey and Squirrel release Martha and the other feral ghouls. She thinks that she's doing a kind gesture, but her actions lead to the deaths of both organ harvesters, the feral ghouls, Martha, and almost her own. It's because of her desire to do good that Lucy is forced to put down Martha, a profoundly traumatic experience, as seen by the prolonged and silent scene afterwards. Her view on the wasteland has been challenged. As for the Ghoul, he learns from Lucy that folks are able to survive without giving up their morals. As he commits evil act after evil act for the sake of survival, it's a kind act from a stranger that ends up saving his life. After handing over Lucy to the Super Duper Mart, the Ghoul collapses as his body starts to go through what appears to be a severe withdrawal. Throughout the entire time Lucy is fighting for her life inside the Mart, the Ghoul is laying down outside, barely conscious as he's slowly dying. It's only after Lucy's heroics and kindness that the Ghoul is saved. Given the choice between killing the Ghoul that spent the day torturing her and then selling her off, or giving him the life-saving medicine to save him, Lucy's kindness wins out. She hands him the vials. The Ghoul learns that you don't have to concede your morals in order to survive. Despite the wasteland's best efforts to contort you into some evil beast, you can still do good. We also get a nice bit of contrast between Lucy and the Ghoul's pre-war movie scene. As mentioned, Lucy has a choice between killing the Ghoul or sparing him. She can shoot him with her 10mm, leave him for dead, or hand him the vials. Cooper Howard's character in the Man from Dead Horse movie has a similar option. He can kill Joey Toro or save him. We see in the previous episode, episode 3, that Cooper Howard wanted to spare Toro. However, in the edit we see at the end of episode 4, the final cut of the film, we see Cooper Howard's character kill Toro. Both Lucy and Cooper Howard's character were given a choice, and despite Howard's initial desire to spare his villain, he ends up killing him anyway, showing the differences between the two. At one point in time, Cooper was like Lucy in that he wanted to save his villain, but outside pressures, just like those faced by both Lucy and the Ghoul in the wasteland, got to him, leading him down a different path. It's a great scene. But there's more to episode 4 than just the intertwined dynamic between the Ghoul and Lucy. There's a whole other side plot. Compelling vault scenes. What, you're telling me that there's more to the Ghouls than just Lucy and the Ghoul roaming the wasteland? Sacre bleu. And yes, I am telling you that. While the dynamic of Lucy and the Ghoul is, in my opinion, the most interesting part of the episode, it also has a well-done and compelling side plot with Norm and Chet. We get to see how both Norm and Chet deal with the aftermath of the Raider attack and how they react to having lost things that they both love. Norm lost his father, Chet lost his gate job, and they both lost Lucy. Norm dedicates his time to discovering exactly why his father was the one that was kidnapped, and Chet sort of wallows in his grief until Norm eventually takes him on an adventure. It's during this side plot that we start to clue in that Vaults 31, 32, and 33 are not quite as hunky-dory as they'd like to present themselves as. Norm is interrupted by a raider who tells him that Vault 32 isn't as innocent as he might think. Betty lightly threatens Norm's curious nature about the raider attack and Vault, and then that eventually brings us to their adventure within Vault 32. The entire scene is tense, grotesque, and puzzling. As a viewer, we have no idea what sort of things the pair will find. As Fallout fans, though, we likely know that something is off, but we're not exactly sure what. And as we see more and more dead bodies and messages on the wall, we can start to piece together what might have happened. It gives off a Fallout video game vibe, just like all those times when we get to explore old and abandoned vaults, reading terminals, looking at scenes, and picking up clues. It's iconic to the game series. And I think that's what makes the vault scenes in this episode so good. We might not know exactly what's going on just yet with the vaults, but it's in this episode that we figure out that it's probably not something good. And that's pretty cool. On to the final reason. Lack of pre-war scenes. Bear with me, I know this makes me sound like a hater, but one of the big reasons why I like episode 4 so much is the lack of pre-war scenes and storyline. Throughout the entirety of the Ghouls, we don't see a single scene from pre-war. The Man from Dead Horse movie scene does not count, by the way. Anyway, I think this decision to omit pre-war scenes in this episode specifically is what made it so good. Now, after seeing the entire series a couple times over now, I'm fully convinced that the pre-war storylines, the ones with Vault-Tec specifically, isn't intended for me or for anyone who's semi-deep into Fallout lore. For us, these scenes don't matter all that much. We know why and how the world was turned into the wasteland. We don't need to see the semantics and inner workings of how that came to be. We already know. Whether it's from reading terminals in the games or watching videos of someone reading the terminals in the games, we know how the wasteland came to be. Heck, we even knew how it happened back in 1997 with the first Fallout game. A brief 4 sentences during the intro scene when you make a new game tells you exactly how it happened. We don't need minutes of dialogue between 2 Vault-Tec executives on how they can manage their returns on investment for the vaults. It's not needed. And for me, it's just not that interesting. Now, I agree that for someone brand new to the franchise, this pre-war exposition is needed. As a casual viewer, if you can't relate to or understand why the world is a post-apocalyptic wasteland, then why continue watching, you know? You need the context of the setting in order to relate with the media that you're watching. And that goes with any franchise in a world unlike our own. If you can't understand the setting and premise, then there's no reason to engage with it. It's that simple. Hence why we have the pre-war scenes in the first place. And despite my dislike for the pre-war scenes, I think what we got was the best I could have hoped for. The story for the Ghoul/Cooper Howard is very compelling and interesting, even with the pre-war scene bits included. So by putting the series' most interesting character in many of the pre-war scenes, it lightens the blow for me whenever we cut to a pre-war film set or office building or house party, so I can't complain all too much. Now, I think episode 4's lack of pre-war scenes actually adds to the episode's overall story. If it hasn't been clear by now, the entirety of the episode, or at least the main plot with Lucy and the Ghoul, is dedicated to how the wasteland changes people. As mentioned before, both main characters go through heaps of change, whether it be Lucy's more measured approach to the wasteland, or the Ghoul's inner reflection on how he let the wasteland change him. We see Roger and Martha change into feral ghouls thanks to the wasteland's perversions. We see how a grocery store changed thanks to the wasteland. We see Snip Snip, who was likely a helpful Mr. Handy before the war, turn into an organ harvester after the war. What changed him? Well, literally it would be someone programming him, but from a literary point of view, it would be the wasteland. If the wasteland didn't exist, Snip Snip's desire for human organs wouldn't have either. So I think that having the episode stick to only post-war events helps maintain the consistency of the episode's theme, how the wasteland changes you. And by the way, just one final bit, the decision to exclude the pre-war stuff had to be intentional. Episode 4 is the second shortest episode in terms of runtime, so if they wanted to tag some more pre-war exposition, they definitely could have. But I think skipping out on the pre-war scenes and solely focusing on the wasteland and how it changes people was the right decision. And that wraps up 5 reasons why episode 4, The Ghouls, is Fallout's best. From the themes to the character development, The Ghouls has everything a Fallout fan could ask for. The entire series is great, but episode 4 truly shines. That's all from me today, folks. If you liked the video, be sure to share and subscribe, join the Discord, have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
No! What a disgusting idea! I'm simply going to harvest your organs.